I serve, in addition to being on the Armed Services Committee, I serve on the Government Reform Committee. And the Government Reform Committee is whenever you hear anybody's going to go testify before Congress, and you see them with their right hand up swearing to tell the truth, that's Government Reform Committee. And it basically is the Oversight Committee. People get called before Congress at the Oversight Committee. And the great thing about that is that I get a question people like Paulson, Bernanke, Cash Carey, all of these guys. And if you go to that website, you will hear me say that I believe this was the largest theft in history. And the reason why I believe it was the largest theft in history is because I was mayor of the city of Dayton in the late 90s as it was turning into 2000, and we already had the mortgage foreclosure crisis there. We brought banks in to try to get them to testify as to what was happening. Bank after bank would come in and say, well, we're not the ones that are giving these bad loans. But what we all know now, not only were they involved in giving the bad loans, they were buying the bad loans, they were packaging them, and they were selling them to your pension plan. And they knew what was wrong. They knew that people were receiving loans that were in excess of the value of their property. I mean, you all remember the downturn in the 80s. In the downturn in the 80s, we didn't have massive foreclosures. We didn't have massive foreclosures because people who had houses had equity. But now, structurally, if you owe more on your house than it is worth, and you lose your job or you have to move, you don't have any other choice but to abandon the house, which was not the situation before. In the 80s, if people got in trouble, they could sell their house. There was still some ability without this massive level of foreclosure. I voted against TARP, and I voted against TARP for a couple of reasons, one of which was that there was nothing in the bill itself that would stop the practices that had got us in this place to begin with. And the fact that they would come in and propose an $800 billion bailout without going directly to the issue of stopping the practices. You know, the very next day after the president signed that bill, there were loans that were being issued that should not have been issued. The very next day. The second thing is that they initially said they were going to go buy these toxic assets and they were going to sell them for value. And I knew they had no value because I've seen the streets of Dayton where 1 out of 5 houses in the city of Dayton is now abandoned. They're abandoned. In Cleveland, it's 25%. And the reason why they're abandoned is because when you get in an urban core like Dayton, like Columbus, Cleveland or other areas, when a house goes to foreclosure, it goes to abandonment. And the moment it goes to abandonment, the plumbing gets stripped, the roof begins to leak, and the house begins down that process for decay. And then what happens is that the people who are living next to it, who didn't get a predatory loan, their housing value has now plummeted. And so they get frozen in their own houses, and you start a cascade of a neighborhood of decay. I believe that not only did the banks know that they were issuing loans that should not be issued, but they did it because they had the process of being able to sell them down the path, so they didn't have any skin in it. They could issue a loan, and the next day they could package and sell the loan, and they could continue the process on down. And then now we know that with the credit default swaps, it was even a larger system of trading of these. And I believe, which is what I've said, if you go to my website, you'll see me interviewing Lehman Brothers and all of these AIG, which also was active in the issuing of these loans and packaging them. I believe they all knew. And if they all knew, that's fraud. And if it's fraud, somebody ought to go to jail, not just that we ought to cut them a check.